Near you.
Let's go.
And the SEC Insider Hit this morning, driven by your next John Deere tractor at Mississippi Ag, 2 locations in the metro area. New location in Canton. You can see it from I-55. And then their Pearl location, which is fairly new, but Canton just opened this year. Mississippi Ag, visit agup.com for your next John Deere tractor, or as you get ready for hunting season, which dove season kicked off over the weekend, you can find your next John Deere Gator at any of the Mississippi Ag locations. Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. The buzz out of Starkville is still Kylin Hill. I mean, it's some KJ Costello, but we had Mason Miller on in the first hour, and he said, most talented player that he has been around at that position. And I don't think that's a surprise, but still, it's you kind of feel like Kylin's been there for forever. We want to welcome in Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, genespage.com. Steve joins us on the Parish Brewing guest line. Steve, what would you say would be a successful year for Kylin Hill?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we all can go ahead and accept the fact that he is not going to lead the SEC in rushing this year, but I think that he will be among the leaders within the league when it comes to all-purpose yards. And I think for him, continuing to kind of round out his game as a pass protector and as a pass receiver, because I don't know that he's got a whole lot left to prove as a ball carrier. There were some big defenses last year that kind of gave him some trouble, and that's really more of a byproduct of the offensive line. But, I think he's the guy that probably needs to get in the end zone probably a dozen times or more this year for Mississippi State and kind of elevate his stock as a draft prospect.
Mason Miller said, O-line coach at MSU, he joined us in the first hour, and, man, he sounded really excited about Dollar Bill at that right tackle position, Steve.
Yeah, and that's what we needed to hear. It's one of those things. Mississippi State obviously has recruited, fairly well the last couple of years on the offensive line. And that was really kind of one of the criticisms of Dan Mullen's staff is that, while they were good at developing players, they didn't do a great job of securing talented offensive linemen. Then you go out and you get Quatravius Johnson, and then, Mullen and Hevesy tried to get him to Florida and was unsuccessful. And he's the guy that people expected to come in here and do a great job. And they showed up on campus about 380 pounds. And now he's running about a solid 320. And I don't know if you've seen his videos online, but he does these dance videos occasionally, which is so silly and ridiculous, but so funny. But this is the guy that can really play. And I think this is the guy that's got a pro football future ahead of him. And so when you begin to think about Charles Cross and Dollar Bill Johnson kind of growing together, and then you think about the continuity you could have with Cole Smith at center, Nick Penley at a guard spot. You've got a group of guys there, nucleus in that offensive line, that can really grow and develop together and provide some continuity and stability on the Bulldog offensive line for years to come.
Yeah, he talked about how, smart and football savvy Cole Smith is. So that's got to be an asset for Leach and Costello.
Yeah, and you know as well as I do. I mean, you've got to have a guy at center that understands to make the calls, a guy that knows how to change protections based on what he sees. And you can't just put necessarily your best athlete out there. You've got to have a guy with some football savvy. And let's be honest, I mean, Cole Smith has grown up a student of the game, the son of a former NFL offensive lineman with Brent Smith. And, those guys have done a great job. And it's just Cole Smith's one of those guys that I think was a great get for Mississippi State, and had they handled it correctly under Mullen the first time, he probably got a couple of years of Bulldog experience under his belt. But it works out. You get him in. Now he's working and appears to be a mainstay at center and could potentially be a 3-year starter for the Bulldogs.
Did you hear anything coming out of the weekend on the team, offense or defense?
Yeah, we spoke to Leach following the scrimmage on Saturday, and Mike said actually it was better than they expected. And I've talked to a couple of other assistant coaches kind of off the record and said they agreed. They said, you know what, we expected certain things, but the guys got out there and competed. And And even though when you got a little deeper in the depth chart and the execution might not have been what you desired, the competitive nature of these guys and their athleticism kind of took over. And, Leach said that they got as deep as the third offensive line, and it still looked like football out there. And I think that really bodes well for the future. But, Mike says that, there were some things that both sides of the football can feel good about and some things that were teachable moments. And I think that's really that's really what you want in a scrimmage. You don't want one unit to dominate the other, and that didn't happen. But you got some things to feel good about, but also some things that you can correct.
And I want to hit on this again, that the speed of practice, and there's not a lot of 10-minute water breaks. So, and think where guys have to stop and kind of get back going. Steve, is that right? And warm back up, and which could take 15 or 20 minutes, if depending on how long you take your break?
Yeah, I mean, and you know as well as I do. I mean, you only have a limited amount of time to practice anyway, and then a 10-minute water break turns into a 30-minute, recess, and you're kind of limping into the water break. You take the water break, and then you got to get everybody's helmets back on and get them going and kind of get them moving, and it's a lag in practice, but. What they're telling me is, hey, everybody's still well hydrated. They're just doing it in between reps, and they take full advantage of their practice time. And receivers are running about 8 or 9 miles a day, so there's no need for any additional conditioning because they're getting it in during reps. And then your DBs, and let's be honest, those corners and those safeties, and you've got some talent there. You just don't have a wealth of experience. And so now you get those guys out there and you rep them and rep them and rep them. So that way, when they get into the ball game, let's be honest, they're not going to see that type of physical fitness required. It's because other teams aren't going to throw the ball as much as Mississippi State. So you've got guys out there for, 3.5 hours running the entire time and defending every route under the sun.
Let's go to the defensive side of the football. Jordan Davis, what are you hearing?
Good things, but, he's a guy, too, that, just kind of figuring it out. He was an Under Armour All-American, signed with Alabama, and, a Memphis kid that spent some time in Bahia, and he's a guy that needs to have a big year for Mississippi State, especially as a pass rusher. I think that his best football is ahead of him. It takes a lot of these junior college guys about half a year to figure it out, and he didn't get the benefit of spring practice. And so his head's still spinning a little bit, but his raw athleticism is still there, and they still expect him to be a very solid contributor this year. Steve
Robertson on the Out of Bounds show. All right, let's switch gears to recruiting. They're now ranked 34th on your site. I think I have that right, 247 Sports. They're ranked 34th. How do you think they're doing now that things have kicked back up, so to speak, amped back up, started back up, high school football, their practices, and so on? And what is left for them on the table, their staff, and can they make a move inside the top 30 or 25, Steve?
Well, I think they're doing pretty well. I won't say they're doing great, and some of that is a byproduct of the fact that we've got kind of a thin in-state talent pool this year. I think they're doing okay. We expect them to get a commitment from linebacker Nick Mitchell later this evening. That's a kid out of Mandarin High School in Jacksonville, Florida, recently committed to Temple. He's got about a dozen G5 offers, and a lot of people look at that and say, well, why are we taking this kid in September? Well, one of the reasons why is you don't have a lot of linebackers in the state of Mississippi this year. I don't know if you have any that you would look at and say this is a sure SEC guy. So you're having to go fish in some out-of-state waters. And so once he commits, that takes you down to 6 spots remaining because State's only going to sign 24 this year. And so you got to get a couple more offensive linemen. You got to get a couple defensive linemen, then probably a couple defensive backs, and that's your class. And I think in order for State to move into the top 30 and stay there, that defensive side, when it comes to recruiting, is where they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to find some pretty solid players there, and not just from a ranking standpoint, but you got to find some contributors there. And I think they will. They're on some pretty good kids. But Leach's highest-rated class was 28, and that was his 4th year at Texas Tech. And he's got a chance to be right there in what's considered a really down year in state and dealing with a global pandemic. And so when you look at things and take a deep breath and look back and say, all things considered, this will turn out to be a pretty good class for Mississippi State. I don't know that it's a great class, but I think you've got some interesting pieces on offense that could be real difference makers.
And you expect them to sign 25 or right around there?
24.
24.
Yeah, 24. They have one initial counter left for 2020, which will go towards a mid-year guy. And then due to the tutor gate sanctions, they only have 23 grants for the 2021 class. It'll be a 24-man class at most.
Okay. And, Blake, do you have a question? Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show.
Yeah, Steve, we had somebody bring this up with Coach Miller, and we didn't get to it with Mason, but I wanted to ask you, since you follow the recruiting. Everybody except for Nick Penley on the two-deep offensive line is from Mississippi, Nick Penley from Georgia. And then I know we've got Leach has 3 or 4 offensive linemen from Mississippi lined up in the next class. Is that obviously he did not recruit the ones that are there already, but is there a conscious effort in staying close to home from Leach continuing on this offensive line, or did that just kind of happen to line up that way? What do you have on that?
Well, I think it's more happenstance. And, they went out and threw some offers at some big-time out-of-state kids, didn't get a lot of return interest. And so you kind of recalibrate. You look at, okay, who can we get? Who's the best available prospects? And I believe that's what they're taking advantage of. And people forget, Kylin Pounders was a huge early in-state win for Mississippi State and Mike Leach. They beat Ole Miss head-to-head. And, of course, they got to continue recruiting them. Arkansas and Ole Miss both very much involved there, not backing off. But Nick Jones, the guy that committed over the weekend, is among Kylin Pounders' best friends, both from Bahalia. And you got to think that positive peer pressure there is a good thing for State. But, it's not a great year in State, but I believe right now if you had to make a call, you would say State probably has the 2 best offensive linemen in the state committed in Kylin Pounders and Gabe Cavazos. And I saw Gabe over the weekend against Senatobia. And I think he's a guy, too, that I think his ranking and his offer sheet are somewhat inhibited because of the fact you didn't have the spring evaluation period, you didn't have camps. He's a guy that's kind of been a bit of a sleeper. But when you see that film and watch how hard that kid plays, he is definitely an SEC guy.
Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, genespage.com. Blake?
No, I mean, I think we hit it. I guess my question would be, and we've talked about this with David too, and we saw this with Navy last night. I don't know, Steve, if you got to catch any of that game. Ken Niumatalolo, the coach for Navy, said, we didn't practice tackling all year. We just hit sleds and dummies in order to be COVID safe, so to speak. And then they did the same thing. They hit sleds and dummies in that game. They did not hit any of BYU's ball carriers. For Mississippi State, I know you haven't gotten to see the practice, but is there enough physicality in practice to be, not high on the defense, but at least they'll maybe be able to tackle in week 1 against LSU?
Yeah, well, they're practicing tackling at Mississippi State. And, you mentioned Navy. They didn't practice tackling, and it certainly showed. Last night, BYU, obviously a very physical and mature football team. Yeah, but to be honest with you, to be fair, I think everybody is going to have some element of tackling rust, when this season begins, because you didn't get the benefit of spring practice. And, you rep it the best you can in the fall, but then you got to dial it back to make sure your guys keep their legs under them and they're healthy whenever you get ready to go play LSU. And so I won't be the least bit surprised to see a lot of missed tackles around the country initially, but I do know that Mississippi State is practicing football, and they're not just out there pushing sleds around and going to get donuts at the end of the day.
Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show. Okay, we've got a question on Austin Williams. This person basically says, I keep hearing good things. He's basically asking, will he be disappointed? So what are your thoughts on the wide receiver out of the Mississippi Gulf Coast that just because Moorhead and them didn't know what they wanted to do on offense really hasn't had an opportunity to have that breakthrough season? Do you think that is going to happen for him this year?
I think so, but I also understand a little bit of the reservation from the caller that texted in there because, for 2 springs, we've heard and seen Austin Williams do really well, and then all of a sudden his number doesn't get called very often, and he's not responsible for that aspect of it. But I think the coaching change is good for him because, number one, Mississippi State's kind of wide receiver poor, but he is a guy that I think this offense is kind of built for. He's a smart guy. He's a very precise route runner, and he's a guy that can make the contested catch. So, yeah, I expect him to be a starter, and I think that he's a guy that could probably catch 50 or 60 balls this year, and Mississippi State needs him to. He's a guy that's been in the program. He's got some SEC snaps under his belt. But if you ever watch him on film, when he does get in the game, this is a guy that flashes. And I don't understand why he didn't get more opportunities last year. Of course, we didn't get the benefit of going to practice every day. But I do think that he is a guy that could have a big breakout year this year. And the offensive philosophy kind of lends credence to that because he is a guy that will benefit from the change.
Can you imagine if he catches 50 or 60 balls? And so he's a rising junior, but this is like a redshirt year, another one for him. I mean, he's a type kid that could take advantage of that, Steve, and stay instead of 2 more years. If this thing is rolling for him and he's catching a bunch of footballs and having fun, he may decide to stay for a 6th year. Your thoughts?
Well, it's good work if you can get it. I mean, this whole SEC college football player thing on an SEC campus, I mean, I don't know if I could begrudge him for hanging around another year. I mean, so and who wants to get out and go pay bills? But be that as it may, yeah, you're exactly right. And I think he's a guy that really benefits from that. And another guy that was mentioned to me that could really benefit on the offensive side of football is a guy like Winston Sharp. This is a guy that people forget. His sophomore year at East Mississippi, he tears the ACL. He comes back last year. The hope was to redshirt him. And then State loses 3 interior linemen the very first game against UL Lafayette. He's pressed into service, ends up playing the full year, loses the redshirt year. Well, he kind of gets that back now. So now you look at it and say, okay, this is a mulligan year. And so rather than him kind of going through the season and potentially being processed out of the program at the end of the year, he has the ability to get healthy and then contribute again next year. And so that's what makes this whole thing so interesting is you're going to have some very mature football players in the years ahead in the college ranks, and I think the quality of play will actually be better.
All right. Let's switch gears here at the end. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show. Baseball. Fall ball, believe it or not, will be here. I know there's a lot going on in that sport, just like every sport. But, what are you looking for from fall ball? What's the one big thing that you're monitoring with Lamonis in this squad?
Got to find a power bat somewhere. I mean, that's the thing you lose, with Foscue and Westberg moving on. And those are guys that were, proven contributors at Mississippi State. I think the pitching is going to be a real strong point. I've had some people close to the program tell me that they think it could be as good as any pitching staff Mississippi State's ever had. You got some potential first-rounders in that weekend rotation. So I think you feel really good about that. And defense has always been, a staple of the Chris Lamonis teams. They're very fundamentally sound. But offensively right now, you look at it and say, okay, I got a bunch of line drive hitters, but who is that guy that can be a game changer for us? And I don't know at this point that person's been identified. There are a few guys out there like Cameron James is a guy we expect to take a real jump this year. We think that he's a guy that will go from being, freshman starter to a guy that'll, will be a guy that'll be kind of the guy on the media guide in the years ahead. I think that he is a guy that's got a big career ahead of him. But outside of that, there's some other guys out there like Logan Tanner that's got some pop. But who do you put in the middle of that order? Who's that guy that teams can't afford to pitch around? And that's what I think State has to identify in the fall. It's just finding some guys that can hit for power in the middle of that order.
Okay. Man, did you see where Foscue was called up to the 60-man roster?
Yeah, I did, and then Rooker comes up behind him. I believe Rooker is player number 57 to play in the major leagues from Mississippi State history, and you got to think
really?
that Foscue could be doing that any day now, so. And
Rooker got a hit and an RBI in his first game, I think, with the Minnesota Twins.
He did. Then he came back the next day and had a bases loaded double that drove in a couple more, and he's
did
the
he
guy,
really?
Brent's always been. Yeah, he's a max effort swinger. So it's like, if you can throw a biting curveball, you might get him. But if you ever leave anything up in the zone, he's going to punish you for it. And that's what he's done his entire career. And, I'll be honest with you, his sophomore year, I would have never seen this from him. I said, you know what, this guy is so bad at picking up spin. Why would you ever throw him a fastball when you know he's going to offer these balls breaking down in the dirt? But then he makes the adjustment. And this is where I give Andy Cannizaro a lot of credit. Andy helped Brent become Brent. Hey, swing hard just in case you hit it, and helps him begin to kind of figure out spin. It really changed the trajectory of his career. And, of course, he wins a Triple Crown. Now he's in the major leagues. And I give Cannizaro a lot of credit for that just because of the fact that I think he saw that in Brent and kept pull that out of there. Instead of him being a guy that tries to take that ball the other way, he teaches him to foul that ball back and get the pitch he wants and put it in the stands.
We'll leave it there. Steve Robertson, genespage.com, the Boneyard Podcast on the Parish Brewing guest line. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. All right. So, well, that was pretty good right there, Blake. I thought the offensive line stuff, Dollar Bill merging as a quote-unquote player on the line at the right tackle position, and then Charles Cross at the left tackle position. Cole Smith, the transfer from LSU, but he's from Mississippi. I think he's from Pontotoc. And then Austin Williams is from Ocean Springs. He's the guy, if he catches 50 or 60 balls, I think people will freak out.
Yeah, he's the one everybody's been waiting on, I guess, which is so funny because it's not like he was an insanely highly recruited player, but it seems like there's always been this discussion, and we thought the Moorhead offense would allow him to be featured a little bit more. But if there's ever an offense in the history of football that has essentially idolized the slot receiver position, it's Mike Leach's offense.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be the most attractive slot receiver offense in the country because it utilizes the middle of the field space.
Right.
And that's where shifty guys, because Austin Williams is going to have two options. He's either going to be lined up on your third or fourth string corner, which should be an advantage. He's either going to be lined up on a safety, which should be a speed advantage, or a linebacker, which should be a speed advantage. So, I mean,
I don't know about the safety speed advantage, but I agree with everything you just said.
Well, maybe shiftiness.
Right.
Safety's straight line speed, yes.
Right.
Shiftiness, I mean, Grant Delpit's gone. It's going to be interesting to see this LSU defense against these MSU receivers.
Can't wait. I can't wait. I haven't had my fantasy football draft yet.
When is that?
I don't know.
I kind of thought I was going to get a message.
Unless they left me out. I don't know. I mean, I'd kind of be okay with that, but I'm kind of looking forward to it.
You kind of feel bad.
Yeah.
You need as much football as you can get this fall.
Yes, I do.
Give me the fantasy football.
All day long.
And day
sports betting, which you can do at the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook.
Glad you didn't bet on the Southern game.
I did not. That would have been a bad deal.
It would have been an SVP bad beat. There you go.
All right. Well, Southern Miss is in the market for a new head coach.
Shocking.
Jay Hobson, there was some pressure. I think Jay looked at it and may have made a great call. Most coaches can't do this. I think he looked at it and said, man, if I go 2-8 or whatever,
it's going to make me look bad.
It's going to make me look bad. I can bail. Everybody can be happy. And I can get a job again. And what I mean by that is a head coaching job, maybe, at some point. But for the first time in his life, he gets to take off, I don't know, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
Or 3 months. Not a bad deal. Get
Dude,
paid.
Interesting. Look, nobody's safe in college football. We know that.
Yeah, we thought that teams would be reluctant to make a change.
Nope.
Because of the pandemic. Not so. Good show today. Mason Miller, offensive line coach at MSU, was really good. That was pretty funny what he said about, hey, Bo, I heard it's not that hard to get to Omaha.
Man, he called that guy out. That random, he said.
That was hilarious.
Woof.
And he had some things to say about Kylin Hill. And of course, his stories on Leach were really good. David Johnson, Ole Miss Insider, and then Steve Robertson. So you can find it all on our podcast. Just go to Apple Podcast or Podbean or Spotify. Hey, the show is presented by Superior Foundation for all your foundation repairs and USA Pawn for all your tools, electronics, and firearms. USA Pawn's Mega Store. See ya.